Caterina Rodriguez, or Kat, is a first-year master's student at the School of Social Work. She hails from the Dominican Republic and has recently made her way up to Boston after a 10-year stint in North Carolina. Kat tells us that she is known for spontaneously quoting movies and befriending strangers' puppies. Just strangers' puppies, or?
All of them.
Oh, all of them, okay.
Really.
Kat is also passionate about serving LGBTQ youth and young adults by advocating for practices and policies that protect and foster gender and sexual diversity. Please welcome Kat Rodriguez.
Thank you. I'm so glad to see everyone here, and I'm also going to stand down here mostly because I'm going to move too much and fall off the stage. So, with that, there are two things that I love to talk about. First is pop culture, and second is controversial topics. I love disseminating and analyzing pop culture because it's what the masses feed into, hence the term popular culture. But I also love talking about controversial topics because I kind of like to make people slightly uncomfortable. But only because for there to be growth, sometimes it calls for us to leave our comfort zones. And that's what I want to do today. I want to get uncomfortable by talking about a not-so-sexy topic, the issue of allyship versus appropriation, through an all-too-sexy TV series that most of us probably know, Orange is the New Black. Now, you're probably wondering, what the heck? How is there a connection between these two? But before I dive into that, I just want to disseminate a couple terms so we're all on the same page. So real quick, appropriation is simply when someone takes something for their own personal use, and in terms of identity, it's usually when someone of a higher privilege status usurps some characteristic or aspect of someone else's identity, usually of lesser privilege, without attributing or acknowledging where those roots come from. Allyship, on the other hand, is when an individual or group enters into a mutually beneficial relationship, usually with someone of less power or less privilege. And I want us to think about allyship throughout this talk as more of an ongoing lifelong learning process as opposed to just a stagnant identity that someone claims. So how does this tie into one of TV's hottest shows right now? Well, first, let me give you a little summary. Orange is the New Black is an adaptation of a woman's memoir, upper middle class white woman who had a brief stint in prison. However, how the TV show differs is that it goes beyond her own experiences and really dives into the surrounding women's experiences and stories. And this is where the show has been heralded as groundbreaking. Because for the first time, we have an all-female lead cast full of diverse, messy, complicated, flawed, and multidimensional stories. And on top of that, the way that they're presented is not just simply by placing them on the screen, but by first actually assaulting us with the very stereotypes that society has taught us to feed into our entire lives. And what this does is that by presenting us with stereotypes, it forces us as an audience to have to break through our own prejudices in order to be able to dive deeper to begin with. But along with those victories have also come some criticisms, the biggest one being that these stories are being appropriated by A, a white woman's experience, and or B, a white screenwriter's career. But my question is, does that automatically invalidate the messages that they're trying to portray? Is there a difference between the identity of a storyteller and the way that they tell and share these stories? And I think that that's a really important question to ask. So we're going to explore that a little bit through 3 case studies. First, Sophia Bursett, who is a black transgender female that ends up in Litchfield prison because of credit card fraud and was actually turned into the police by her own son. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is probably the stereotypical story of a trans person who didn't get the support that they needed through their transition and therefore turned to coping mechanisms through risky behaviors. That was a lot. But when we dive deeper into Sophia's story, what we actually see is that she had incredible amounts of support throughout that transition, especially from her own wife. And the fraud came into play because that was actually the only way that she had to advocate for her own identity. Because it points to a much larger theme and systemic issue where we still live in a healthcare system that mostly tells people who they're going to be from the moment that they're born, and it's declared by a complete stranger in a white coat. And we live under a binary that really doesn't allow for anyone to question or actually explore who they are. And what ends up happening is the narrative we hear all too often, where this entire population of people is marginalized and cornered into making compromising decisions just to advocate for who they are. So second, we have Gloria Mendoza. Now, Gloria ended up at Litchfield's prison for a food stamp scam in her workplace, a convenience store. And at first, what we are presented with is the story of the immigrant worker who works a low-paying job and is trying to make quick cash on the side, probably to try and support the family that was too big to begin with for her to afford. However, when we explore her story a little bit more, what we find is actually a survivor of domestic abuse at the hands of her boyfriend who's trying to make money as fast as she can because she still lives in a society where labor and economic systems are oppressive and basically render social and class mobility impossible. And what she's trying to do is not gather money for provision, but for survival, to get her kids out of there before the abuse spreads to them. And what we see in her story are two big themes. First is the issue of economic oppression when it comes to anyone outside of the middle and upper middle class. But second, and more importantly in her case, you ask yourself, well, why didn't she turn to the police? Why didn't she report it? And it comes up with a theme that we have here with assault and abuse survivors that are forced to jump through so many legal loopholes just to be heard that by the end of the process, they have actually been silenced instead of empowered to speak up. So our third case example is Tiffany Doggett, also lovingly known as Pennsatucky, and she ends up at Litchfield because she shoots an abortion clinic worker. And now, the way that she's presented to us is first is a quite aggressive, religiously fervent, drug-addicted, uneducated, sexually promiscuous mountain hillbilly, for lack of a better word. But when we dig deeper into her story, what we actually find are three huge themes. Let me tell you real quick why she shot the clinic worker, and it'll make more sense. She basically taunted her for being there for her 5th abortion that time. And so she went outside, got her shotgun, came back in, and shot her right in the face. So what ended up happening, actually, in Tiffany's life, what her adulthood speaks to are three big issues. First is the failure of our education system to actually teach our youth a comprehensive sex health curriculum, which then renders them sexually irresponsible, and then end up in certain sexual promiscuous situations. Second is the issue of the poverty that is so pervasive in rural communities that is only reinforced by hyper-capitalistic functionings of our society. And third, and I would argue most importantly for that one moment of violence in her life, is the issue of women and ownership of their bodies, specifically with abortion. Pennsatucky had grown up dealing with the consequences of these systemic failures, rising up in her life for years. And the one area where she could actually exert any kind of control, anything she had left of power, was her own body. And the moment that that was threatened by the nurse, she snapped. So you may be asking yourself, why do I actually include a white woman in this trio of awesome ladies? Well, that is because I want us to understand that privilege doesn't exist in discrete, neat little categories, but rather it varies within even one single category of identity. I'll use myself as an example. I am a queer Hispanic immigrant. I know, I hit the trifecta of privilege with that one. And to claim that I have the same amount of privilege, or lack thereof, as other queer people, as other Hispanic immigrants, would be a flat-out lie. I know that because of my lighter skin, because of my linguistic fluency, and because of my more feminine-presenting demeanor, I am imbued with a kind of passing privilege that other people are not, whether it be that I pass as heterosexual or whether it be that I pass as white. Now, don't get me wrong, I loudly and proudly claim my identities, but at the end of the day, that doesn't matter because in society's eyes, I still have a higher status than other people who identify in the exact same way I do. And what is the point of that? The point is that just like privilege doesn't function so simply, neither does appropriation. And this is where we have to be careful to not marginalize our allies because they have been instrumental in every social movement. And this is where Genji Kohan fits in, the writer of Orange is the New Black, in understanding how multifaceted these privileged tier systems are. In 2013, in an interview, she made a statement about this kind of thing. And she said, In a lot of ways, Piper was our gateway drug. We wanted to write stories about all sorts of women and their experiences, but it's very hard to sell a show about women of different colors and different ages and different socioeconomic backgrounds. This way, we almost get to sneak in these amazing characters and amazing stories through this white girl going to prison. With each episode, we explore a different character. What Kohan understood was that she had a very, very special kind of privilege and platform, and that the protagonist of the memoir also had a very special kind of privilege and platform. And what she did was actually use that platform to elevate these stories in a way that they never would have been elevated. Now that, my friends, is what we call allyship, which is awesome. And this is why we need to be very careful to just jump to the conclusion or call someone an appropriator simply because they don't look or identify the same way as the people they're trying to give voice to. And I want to highlight a quote from Kerry Washington, lead star of Scandal. She was recently honored as an honorary ally to the LGBT community at the Grad Media Awards. Now, this is a bit of a long quote, but there's a lot of wisdom in it about allyship, so bear with me. I don't decide to play the characters I play as a political choice. Yet the characters I play often do become political statements because having your story told as a woman, as a person of color, as a lesbian, or as a trans person, or as any member of any disenfranchised community is sadly often still a radical idea. There is so much power in storytelling, and there is enormous power in inclusive storytelling and inclusive representations. We must be allies, and we must be allies in this business because to be represented is to be humanized as long as anyone, anywhere is made to feel less human. Our very definition of humanity is at stake, and we are all vulnerable. We must see each other, all of us, and we must see ourselves, all of us, and we have to continue to be bold and break new ground until this is how it is, until we are no longer firsts and exceptions and rare and unique. In the real world, being an other is the norm. In the real world, the only norm is uniqueness, and our media must reflect that. Now, what Washington is trying to get at in her speech and what Kohan is trying to depict in her TV show are one and the same thing. We all have something at stake in this fight for humanity and equal rights, from the most marginalized to the most privileged. No one gets to say that they're out of this fight because it affects us all. And yes, we have come a long way, and it's sad that we still need to use these kind of strategic plans to share these kinds of stories, but we have to acknowledge that we still have a long way to go. We can't just ride on the coattails of our past victories into the hopes and dreams of the future without acknowledging the realities of our present. And our present reality is this: privilege exists in the most intricate ways now more than ever, and therefore we need our allies. To admit this doesn't make us weak, it makes us smart. And to deny this doesn't make us strong, it makes us ignorant. Thank you.